Hello and good evening from the UK, and hello to you wherever you are. I know it's Memorial Day for some of you, and it's a bank holiday here in the UK, but we are here as ever to talk about self-publishing poetry. And this evening I'm going to be talking to Emma Blass. Hi, Emma. Am I
Hi,
pronouncing
Orna.
am I pronouncing your surname
Yeah,
correctly?
I use
Yeah.
Blas, but yeah.
It's Blas. Well, I will tell you that in Irish, Blas is a verbal flavour. And the Blas in a poem or a line, I saved this, I didn't tell you this before when we were chatting earlier. The Blas in a line or of poetry or, in a story is very much the voice of the author. So you've got a really poetic name in Irish.
Wow, I had no idea. Actually, it is a pen name, and it's one I adopted based on my adopted home, which is in
Okay.
Spain. Blas was and it's not meant to be anti-English because I am English, but he was a captain, a very young captain who was incredibly successful at ship battles. Chasing the English off, and I wish I could remember more of the details, but he was incredibly young, and he was there because it's such a long time ago. There was this more kind of like myth and legend, but at the age of 24 or something, he was an admiral, and he'd been through these battles, lost like an arm, a leg, an eye, or something like that, and still he persevered. And I loved this kind of like resilience in the message, and so it was something from my adopted home. It was something from similar to my actual surname, and I'm not one for war, but it was quite poetic, I suppose, about the way that he had persevered through these battles, and nothing could stop him, and maybe I wanted that for my writing.
That's fantastic. And you have, because we are here this evening to talk about a second collection, getting a second book off the ground, up and out there. And and we spoke a while ago on, I think it was not our last show, but our show before that, we were talking about the first poetry book and the significance of the first book. And of course, it's a hugely significant moment in any writer's life, getting that first collection together. So yeah, before we talk about book number 2, which is going to be, and the process of doing that and what you learned from it and what you took from book 1 into that, just tell us a little bit about yourself, the type of poetry that you write, and the links indeed between book 1 and book 2.
Sure. I am a bit of a world wanderer, but I have settled my feet in northern Spain in the Asturias. I fell in love with it doing a big van trip across Spain and Portugal from the UK to find a forever home. And my plan was to live in Portugal, but I completely fell in love with Asturias, which is kind of like a hidden jewel in the north of Spain that even people in Spain don't really know about, and hardly anyone in the UK has heard of. It's very like Wales. It's very lush, very green, which means it does rain a lot, but it has more sunshine and warmer weather than back in the UK, just as humid. And there's kind of like a bordering difference. Like we border Galicia, and I think Galicia to me is a bit more like Ireland.
Yes, that's where my brother lives, actually.
Oh, really?
My brother and sister-in-law, yes, and niece, yes.
It's just
Yes.
absolutely good. Well, I'm about 20 minutes from there, so we're right on the border, and it's just absolutely stunning. And yeah, as a poet, all the words were just pouring out, being inspired by this place.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've also spent time working living as a yoga teacher, and I'm quite interested in kind of like the universal spirit, and I think that sort of comes through. So nature-based, not spiritual in the spiritual sense, like in a religious sense, but I think there's a certain oneness that is sort of woven into, or is found in nature, that is woven into the poetry. I'm also, in my day job, I work in diversity and inclusion, And so I'm quite passionate about inclusivity, and so sometimes my sort of like rage against injustice sort of like gets woven in, but kind of metaphorically.
Wonderful. Now, when you spoke about the experience of book two, we just start with the writing. You said that it was much smoother, and I think this is something that's really kind of important to say to self-publishing authors, because book one can be a bit overwhelming, right? There's so many things to kind of get together. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I definitely approached book two logistically in the same way that I did book one. So rather than, I didn't at any point get overwhelmed with either book, because I just chopped it up into small pieces, and I just concentrated on the manuscript first before I worried about anything else. So I wrote the first book, in a Word document, and then I got to the end and was like, oh, right, now what do I do with this? And then I looked into like Amazon and other publishers and the feasibility of everything. So it was very much, the first book taught me how to write a book, I suppose, and to call myself a poet and a writer, an author. It was more of I take a deep breath. I'll say it was more of like a personal journey of standing in one's power, I suppose. And then the second book, I had all of that down. I sort of knew what the logistics of publishing were. I'd taught myself the Amazon way, and I knew by that point about that the manuscript should be in a certain format if it's going to be published. So the second time, I was able to really sort of like sink into the poetry more than, it's strange to say it, because the first book, writing it with no sort of like end goal or no known end goal, but the second book, I'd sort of, I suppose you read your first book back, and there's a lot of really good poems in it. I think it's a really good piece, but I do not like my first book. I'm sure I'm not alone. Because I talk about this often with friends, but it's part of the perfectionist, and part of the person who you are when you finished the first book is an entirely different person than when you started. And through the process of what you've learned through the publishing process, I would go back and I would do it differently. The poems would be different. It would be more integrated. There would be more of a story. I think I weave the story well in the first book, but in the second one, it was embodied. Like the writing, I had something and it was embodied. The story I was telling was in my bones, and it was coming out in the book, and it was definitely more thought through. But it was, writing poetry is something ethereal, isn't it? It kind of like catches you, and if you are in it's not necessarily, people write differently, but for me, it's not something like, okay, Monday morning at 10 a.m. I will write 20 minutes of poetry and it will be about this. So I have to kind of like create a mood for myself. And all of that mood was created by writing the first book, reading the first book back, putting it out there, not pressing delete. My finger was hovering over delete so many times. And then I talked myself around to it, and saying like what I actually enjoy, being able to see my own growth as a poet, as a writer, and other people being able to see that, because I like being able to kind of look at writers I follow. I'm a huge Ada Limon fan, and I love seeing how her poetry has changed through her books, for example. And I mean, they're strong as the whole way through, but the themes that kind of and the tone is maturing, and I like that. So I gave myself a break, and
Definitely Michael Ron actually has said something to me once that has never left me. I don't know if you know Michael. He also does one of our podcasts, the member Q&A, and he said an author, a poet, a writer is the worst judge of their own work. And never, ever, ever let your own feelings about your work make you press delete, because the reader is taking probably something entirely different from, what you see is not what you see is not what they see.
And it's still good, but the second one, I like it a lot.
That's great. So you're
proud of myself.
That's fantastic. That's really, really great. So, I mean, you've spoken really eloquently about the writing part of that and what was different. You also said that the book you started writing when it came to book 2, the book you ended up with was different from the book you started to write. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Incredibly so. So the second book, it's part of I don't want to call it a series because they're not really connected other than thematically. And so I knew when I was writing the first book that was about and inspired by with the muse of the wind, that the second one would be about the water. And so I came out, and the poems were already coming out when I was still sort of publishing the first one. It was something that really wanted to be a story that wanted to be told, and I was spending a lot of time. I live by the water, very close to the ocean, and so I spend a lot of time at the ocean, and there was a lot coming through, and so I kept writing. I did the functional stuff on putting the first book out, and then we hit a global pandemic. So that was the first thing that kind of changed the tone of the book. And then so about halfway through, about 3/4 of the way through of writing the book, then we found out that my dad had terminal cancer, and then everything changed, and then the book, I didn't even know I was writing about it then, but I look back and particularly when I look at the reviews, then it became a book about grief. I was sort of writing about the grief grieving the impending loss of a loved one. And so, what started as the books are elemental, natural world. There's definitely an element of human behavior that I'm very curious about and understanding. They're very visual. There's a kind of urgency about taking care of the environment and sort of ecocide kind of message. But there has never been really dark feelings about grief, and there is in this book. And some of them are a little bit painful to sort of look back at, because then I go back to that place of where I was when I was writing it. But I can also see that it is a healing process.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the publishing part of it. I mean, you kept going, and first time out you had published with Amazon only, I think, and then second time out you took in Ingram Spark. And did you distribute the ebook more widely as well? Talk to us a little bit about your publishing decisions.
Yeah, the first time around, I'm not a big fan of Amazon from a kind of not paying their taxes kind of what's the word for that?
Ethical perspective.
Ethical, thank you.
Or perceived ethical perspective.
Perceived ethical perspective. Yeah. And I really wanted to support independent bookshops, but that was the only thing I would say was overwhelming at that point. Was whoa, that's too much to decide. And I wasn't a member of ALLi at that point, so I was doing all the legwork on my own. And actually part of calling myself an author was joining ALLi after the first book. And I had made the decision about Ingram before joining, but I learned a lot from the Facebook group. It's absolutely fascinating, learning from each other about everyone's processes. And so I decided, okay, this time, yeah, I've got this part, the writing process is much easier. I'm very clear that I want to expand my distribution, and I want to make it as accessible as possible for everybody, particularly those, because I did have some friends who were like, oh, I'm not buying it on Amazon the first time around. And I want to support independent bookstores. And I also decided I would be, I knew from the offset, rather than bring it in at the end saying, oh, I need reviews, and then sort of and pushing people I knew had bought it, please review me if you would like to. Obviously don't feel obliged with all the caveats you have to put in, so as not to be leading anybody. And so I also knew that I wanted to do an advanced reader program, and so I was clear on that from the offset. So I went with Ingram Spark. I have not pushed the ebook too much because I like that the ebook is more accessible from a price point, but I think for myself with poetry, it's got to be in a physical book. I don't know about you.
Well, for us, for ALLi, I mean, I think everybody has their own personal preferences, and I too am a print book person, but that's partly my age. I recognize my daughter and all her friends, it's audiobooks, and right. And I read fiction, and I do read ebooks, and often I'll buy, though, a print book. If I've really loved the ebook, I'll buy print.
Yeah.
So I love print. But from ALLi's perspective, it's about the reader. It's not about us as the author. So it's about making the books available in as many formats as possible, and as widely as possible. And recognizing that, as widely as possible might mean just one distributor first time out, or on a particular book. We're busy, time is always at a premium, and so on. But ideally, audio, ebook, and print, have them up and out there, so at least the reader can purchase in their own preferred format, even if you're promoting one of those formats more than the other.
Yeah. And so it is now more widely available, and we'll come on to talk about the pause later.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I won't say more about distribution here, but
yeah, talk to me about the reviews, because I think this is really interesting, and folks who are listening might want to ask questions. Please do feel free to put a question or comment in the chat, people, if you have anything that you want to ask Emma about publishing a book second time out, book number 2. You kind of touched off it there about the reviews, and I know myself that you were determined, and I'm quite interested in how you went about this, and you were determined to get reviews. So tell people how you did that.
Well, I did a bit of research first, because obviously there are lots of companies supporting authors out there in running art programs, but there aren't so many supporting poets. And so one part of me, because I'm quite stubborn and quite independent, was like, well, I'll just do it myself. And so actually I started approaching some authors. I was already part of Book Sirens as a reader, because I wanted to support the independent writing community. And I do also buy a lot of ebooks. I buy ebooks for stuff that I know I'm just going to devour really quickly. So I write nature poetry, but I love fantasy books. So, and I've got quite into gas lamp fantasy recently. And so because I would devour far too many books and my bookshelf is already heaving, I do buy a lot of ebooks in those kind of formats. So I was already part of Book Sirens, and so I started approaching some of the reviewers that they have there. And I also did a lot of research at the same time on who does ARC programs. So I approached quite a lot of traditional organisations. Many of them told me, no, we don't do poetry, or no, we don't do self-published authors. Some of them put me in touch with other ones. They are quite expensive. And I also found it quite complicated about what they were offering. So there's no sort of like standardized package. And at that point, I was coming at it completely green. So I didn't really know what I wanted. So, but in short, most of them offer a kind of like quick burst of activity. So on your book launch, you can make a big kind of like impact, a big fuss about your book by maybe over 3, 4, 5 days, having bloggers review your book each day. They go out and push it in their social media. You push it in your social media. So in one way, you're marketing, and on the other hand, you're getting reviews, which you can then use for your own promotion activity. So I think they might range according to, or they might vary according to traditional, or not traditional, but fiction books versus poetry. But what seemed to be available mostly for poetry is about a week of activity. And so I reached out into the forum, and it was yourself, Orna, who recommended that I approach Anne Cater of Random Things. And yeah, I really liked the way that she came back with information about what to expect from a blog tour. And the price was quite reasonable. And at this point, I still didn't really know too much about it, but I thought, oh, okay, I'm just going to dive in. This book, I'm just diving in and doing everything. So I had that set up for launch. The premise is that you send books out about, ideally, I think you book this no later than 6 weeks before the launch of your book. And you send out, if you can, physical books or ebooks. But again, I think poetry is something to be, you have to touch the pages. And so I sent out physical books, which obviously increases the price or the cost for the author. And then they get reading, and wonderful Anne, or whoever is organising your blog tour, will then they're all scheduled in, and she will give them a little nudge on the day of review. And it's like Christmas for an author. It's like opening up the calendar, and there's a little chocolate inside. Like every day you're like, oh, what are they going to say about my book? And the reviews were absolutely incredible. So I will say I did a roundabout way of explaining it. So I did 3 different approaches in terms of getting reviews. One was using my own mailing list and fans. So I'm more on Instagram than I am in other social formats. So I have recruited the more enduring fans and the purchasers of the first book who enjoyed it to a mailing list. And so I offered it out to everybody. At one part of me was like, oh, but then I'm undervalue the sales of the second book. But like you said, you also buy physical books from an ebook that you like. So, and there was, I think there's always a scarcity demon sitting on the shoulder versus the abundance demon. And so I threw everything into abundance this time. I was like, well, I'm investing in my future with this book, so I'm throwing it all in. And so I offered it up to everybody. About 20 people took it. And I think by the end of it, maybe 4 or 5 of them actually completed the review. I would say this really surprised me by being my least effective prong. But also that is because of what happened in my life and not being able to kind of engage with people to keep the excitement about the launch going, because sort of the bottom of my world sort of fell apart, and then I just couldn't put myself out there. And so I think that was probably part of that. Book Sirens were really lovely to work with. I really love what they do. And
we
I'm a
will
big fan.
include the link in the show notes, but for those who may not know what Book Sirens is, if you could just do a short explanation.
Yeah, they're basically an organisation that connect readers with authors. And so they recruit based on the kind of genre that you like reading. And they send out newsletters, and you're allowed, they're also quite selective about how many books you can have sort of like out at the same time. So for a while, until you've sort of proven yourself as a reviewer, you can only take out one book at a time. And then as you prove that you can review on time, and then they start increasing the number of books that you can have at any one time. And I think, I really respect what they do. And I think anybody listening who's a part of ALLi should be part of one of these services, supporting other independent authors and doing the things that we want reviewers to do for us. And they have I've read some fantastic books with them, some less fantastic, but some really fantastic. So join Book Sirens. I'm not remunerated in any way or form for them. I just really enjoy what they do.
Fantastic.
And so I think the only criticism I would have with them, and I think this is because of poetry, and maybe they've ironed this kink out. In terms of categorization, they categorize me as nature rather than poems or poetry. So I don't think I got as many people even sort of like going through to look at the book, because not many people look at nature as a kind of book theme and then get to it. An even smaller number of people who like nature and also poetry. Whereas if it was the other way around, I think it would have been more effective. So that's my small bugbear with that. But all in all, I think my own list was about 30% effective. Book Sirens was about 70%. And I would say Ann Cater was 85%. And that was only because somebody dropped out right at the last minute. They decided to stop blogging, and Anne was quite upset about that.
I've never seen that happen with Anne before, so it's just a one-off thing. Yeah. Okay.
And she tried to recruit somebody else, and I think he got sent the ebook, but nothing ever came of it.
Okay.
However, the quality of the reviews from Anne's list, incredible.
Really yes, and incredible. She's one of the few that does poetry. We're trying to encourage more people to include poetry in their programs. I mean, it is a major macro genre that just gets ignored a lot of the time because there is this myth that there is no money and their readers, which has been debunked by authors who are doing extremely well, but has yet to filter through. But it's happening. It's definitely better than it was, and also this whole thing of being turned down because you're self-published, we're also trying to work on that as well. And I think time will do its work there, but it can be a bit frustrating sometimes.
When I reached out to people as well, there was some people didn't know how to review poetry. There was a kind of fear. I think there's still an intellectualization of poetry that maybe people are nervous to step into it. I myself find it quite difficult to review other people's poetry. I feel there's pressure to intellectualize it.
Yes, and it's the way most of us learned poetry in school. And so, whereas we would have read more widely for pleasure outside of school, and so formed our own way of understanding fiction and non-fiction, the school thing still looms. And if you've done English Lit at university, which a lot of writers and reviewers have, all that just kind of stays with you. But that's one of the reasons I love Instagram and the whole Instagram poetry movement, is that it is, sure, there's a whole load of stuff there is it poetry at all? Maybe not, but it's just wonderful to have that whole expression, going on.
It's almost more emotional.
Yeah, it's freed from the intellectualizing, as you're saying. Yeah, so what, in terms of, again, second book and the learnings and everything, what will you not do again?
Oh, I will not make so many mistakes with my proof copy for Ingram Spark or my imagery, so I won't have to pay to re-upload it. Yeah, there were some bugs coming out. I used an editor this time because I used the manuscript from Amazon, and it's just full of bugs. And so I sent it to a professional formatter, but there was, I can't remember, I think something had gone wrong with the chapter headers, so I had to re-upload it.
Okay, you do know that as an ALLi member, you get a discount on your re-uploads to Ingram, do you? And Ingram shouldn't cost you any money at all.
I did get the first one free. Yeah.
Okay, good. But your revisions also. Yeah. So next time, yes, it isn't a very nice. We're very grateful to Ingram Spark for that. For that very nice discount for ALLi members. Yeah, so hold that in mind. But anyway, the proofing thing is central. It's important, right?
Yeah, I'll get the proofing down the next time. I will definitely. Well, I'm still. So I had mentioned her earlier. I had a friend who introduced me to ALLi, and back when I very first started writing, she was like, "These are good, Emma." She was like, "You should start a mailing list." I was like, I'm not going to start a mailing list. I feel like I need to be sure that I have something to say. I've got nothing to say yet, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, okay, but. And then I found myself at, the first book, and I was like, oh, yeah, here I go, starting a mailing list. And so I still feel like I need to do more work in growing that. And I will definitely do a lot more engagement with my mailing list in terms of getting them to review early and get it out there early.
Now you mentioned what happened there. You lost your dad and grief came in like a wall kind of thing, and you stopped. And we had a very interesting talk before coming on air about the power of the pause, because I had a very similar experience some years ago where I stopped completely. And when I came back, actually, self-publishing was happening. So yeah, it was, but I really learned about the power of the pause in taking you to the next level as a person and as a writer. Talk to me a little bit about what happened there for you and what it has meant for your writing and your publishing going forward.
So I rushed to get the book together so that as it was dedicated to my father, I wanted to put it in his hands before he passed away, and I managed that. Thank you to my formatter and my designer, who I'm really grateful for. And sorry, my puppy's just woken up, so there's a weird groaning in the background. And yeah, I will forever have that memory. And then it was all about him and losing him, and so that the book launched, and there was no fanfare in me whatsoever. I think I managed to post one social media post. I think I managed to send one thing out to my mailing list, and then I've just really been in a hole ever since. And so I think what's made me realize is the thing about self-publishing and why I do it is about freedom, and retaining my freedom. It's kind of an emancipation from the chains of I'm not sure how to finish that sentence, but
from the chains,
just from the chains. But what it does mean is that, it would have been really nice at that point if somebody could have done the marketing for me and taken over and gone, okay, you've done your work with the content, with the creative thoughts, you've got your ARC set up, you've come some way. But then I couldn't do any of the other things that that needed to be done, and I still haven't been able to, because I still feel very, I was almost reluctant to do this podcast, because I still feel very, very quiet and very antisocial. I'm sort of in my cave, not licking my wounds as such, but kind of. And I'm in that pause, and it feels like that was something that I think most people can resonate with after 2020. Everyone kind of fell into a little bit of a pause, and now, as I mean, in the north of Spain, it's been a little bit more open, but as I speak to friends in the UK coming out of lockdown, there's some people that are a bit reluctant to go back to the old ways, and not feeling so sociable, not feeling so
wanting to take the lessons, I guess, and
yeah.
hear what it's saying, which I think is, you know, as writers, we have to take in before we can give out, and that period of, you know, not rushing that, being brave enough to kind of just stay there. So you stay there as long as you need. And
it's I'm quite I've gone through my writer's blocks, and I've had my issues, my bugbear with writer's block, and challenged it and been like, I want to be out, but I've made my peace with writer's block, and I see it as a time to do other things, whether that's to take in, like to bring some different inputs in, or to right now is kind of like, okay, well the book is out. There are things that I've been unable to do. What is this teaching me, or what could I do with this time instead? And so it's made me look more at the kind of content, because I am very passionate about inclusion and accessibility, and in my day job and in my life. And so I'm now putting together an audiobook, which I didn't have the capacity to do, kind of because of everything that was going on and being sort of displaced. And so I'm working on the audiobook. I'm also, after that's done, then I'm going to look at doing a large print version, because I think poetry should be accessible for everybody. And so I want to make it as accessible as possible. And there were some other things I was doing. I still haven't, when I think about the marketing, the thing I thought after the first book, okay, second book, I'm going to get in there with the Amazon ads, and I'm going to sort of like do that kind of thing. And I just can't bring myself to do it yet. So maybe that will be book 3.
Fair enough.
For me now, it's about making it accessible, and also I think redefining my audience. And so when I feel like I can build community again, then I will be engaging in community, and that's something that I loved most about Instagram. Like, there's a lot of falseness that I kind of don't like, and that puts me off it. But the community that I found there is incredible and is wonderful, and it's more instant review, or more instant kudos that you receive, instant feedback. But those, I do. I miss engaging with that community, and I would like to then go and find the way that community helps my creative process. I want to then go and find communities in kind of like nature and women's empowerment kind of areas. So
fantastic.
Community and content. That's what my pause has taught me. And also just to take the time and be sad.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, listen, thank you so much for taking time out of your time out to come and talk to us and to tell us about your book 2. And just tell everybody, I think we've been calling it book 2 since the start of the show, and we haven't named it. So just a little bit about the book and where people can find it.
Watery Through the Gaps is available wide. You can find it in most online bookshops and Amazon. It's a collection of, it's a collection, but it's kind of also a curated story of moving from, I'm reluctant to say what the journey is, because I like that everyone has their own interpretation of it. But for me, it's about how we are separate from nature, and in that we are separate from ourselves. And through the course of the book, we come back to find, we find our way back to nature, and then we find our way back to a certain kind of freedom.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's really badly articulated.
No, on the contrary, it's beautifully articulated, and it exactly describes my experience in reading it. And thank you so much for coming to talk to us about publishing it. And yeah, when you get to book 3, maybe we'll have a chat about that. But until then, yeah, happy writing and lying low. So that's it, folks. We will have another poetry, self-publishing advice on poetry for you in a month's time, and that will be our last one of the season. I think we're going to have a general Q&A where we answer your most pressing questions about poetry publishing. So if you have questions, you can drop them here on this actual Facebook Live, or you can send them through to us at info@allianceindependentauthors.org with the subject line poetry questions. And the podcast of this, the audio will be out on the Self-Publishing Advice blog on Friday, and we'll have all the show notes and all the websites and everything that Emma talked about, as well as links to her book and her website. So thank you all again, and have a good evening or day wherever you are. Bye bye now.